What is up, fellow hosts and humans? We're here at the end of the road of Westworld Season 4 with this breakdown, recap, and review of the finale titled Que Sera, whatever will be, as Frankie and Caleb sang a little bit later on, which was a nice nod to that. So, this finale is somewhat closing things up for what is hopefully going to be a 5th and final season. We actually have some slight teasers from the showrunners of Westworld that we'll be diving into at the very end of this video, so stay tuned for that. No promo to break down this week, but let's go through the events of this episode. We pick up the episode, we have a bunch of people dead, and this was a bit of a fun play on almost like the humans in the Season 2 Uprising in Westworld. We had the hosts, and we have Stephen Ogg back, good old Trevor from GTA, and they're just kind of like, what is going on? Obviously, all of the hosts within the New York City that Dolores has been ruling over for the past 23 years don't really know what the man in black has done. So all of this at this point in time is a little bit like the Purge movies. Everyone is just dying, and one thing that I just want to say as it's coming to my mind is that I would have liked for this season to have reflected outside of New York. Now, I'm not asking for like huge things like massive scenes in other cities or anything like that, but even just a news reporter saying that anarchy is going all around the world. Supposedly humans by the end of this episode are going to be more or less extinct, but we never really got a sense of the whole world. It just felt like, you know, you had this New York City being ruled by Dolores in the tower, but you had humans in the diner, you know, chilling when Bernard and Stubbs went there. So like, what's it like out there? Are there other towers in each corresponding city in each country around the globe sending out the signal? It might not bother so many people, but it just, you know, for me to believe that the whole world is going apocalyptic, it's just hard when it's literally just within New York this whole season. And from the promo of last week's episode, as you guys know, we've been breaking them down at the end of the videos, it kind of did go how I thought it would go. We have a drone host pick up Dolores, just laying in that somewhat pool, if you will, and Maeve's freaking body there, we'll talk about that a little bit later for returning characters maybe, and she gets put into a new body by the drone host, one that is a little bit stronger so she can combat the host in black. One thing I did find a little bit contrived is that the bullet, you know, went in her head and her host control unit was fine to be brought back. It's not something I want to massively complain about, but usually bullets to the head do obliterate the host control unit and thus the actual host itself. I thought that there's going to be something a little bit more clever up Hale's plan, meaning that maybe she has like a backup pole made every 24 hours so that if she got brought back, albeit it would be a copy of her, it would have only been from like the day before. Now this is when the drone host picks up Bernard's tablet and we start to see Dolores look at the message saying it won't be long before you and every other host on this planet are dead as well. And this isn't the world you wanted, Charlotte, but it's the world you created. But the question is, what happens next? And we didn't get the rest of that conversation until a little bit later on, because this is when we then go to Christina and Teddy walking back to Christina's apartment amongst all the bodies of the New York City Purge. She acknowledges that she is essentially a program running things from behind the scenes. And this is where we more or less have this explanation behind what has allowed Christina, the new Dolores, if you will, to awaken, because we can't forget when Dolores was wiped last season, most of her memories were literally wiped to the point of where you kind of are dead, albeit that your base code there is still existing, so to speak. So Dolores took that this season to put Christina to work, but something that is and has always been a part of her coding, the very fiber of what makes up her being, I mean, I guess a level below that, the coding, is for Dolores to have awoken, like what we've seen in previous seasons. So here we see that Teddy isn't technically real. There is a Teddy out there in the Sublime, as we hear about later on, but he's off, I don't know, for all we know, fishing right now. But this Teddy is just really the kind of inner weaving of the coding of Dolores, trying to, you know, make things for herself to clue herself in on, I don't know, becoming awake. So one way of doing that was the maze. It was actually herself who painted that. Amongst all of this, she's acknowledging that she's been searching. She must have made herself a friend, which was Maya, her roommate. And it just keeps going on like that for her to kind of realize. And then when she kind of looks at Teddy again and how she was afraid of all of this until she somewhat conjured him along. And that's when they have a little bit of a Teddy Dolores kiss. So really, she's kind of kissing herself there, since this isn't really Teddy. But either way, she's having fun. That's when we cut back to Dolores, kind of getting a little bit more of the end of Bernard's message, saying it's time for only one more game, but it isn't yours. I hope you can accept that. She destroys the tablet, and she starts stamping on the Red City map. And that's because beneath it is the pearl of Christina, the somewhat new Dolores, if you will. Meanwhile, whilst this was happening, Teddy and Christina were like, why are the lights turning off? What's going on? Because she's gone a bit portable as Dolores walks out into the apocalyptic purge. And that's when we see Frankie and Caleb and Stubbs. They're making their way to the boat that Frankie's girlfriend was keeping ready so they could haul ass out of New York City. And this was going pretty much as expected as well. We know that Caleb is one of the human hybrid hosts, if you will, and those never truly stuck, unless maybe you want to talk about the season 2 Man in Black fidelity testing thing, which I don't believe we still haven't had addressed, which is something people are still complaining about, and understandably, to be honest. And so as a result, Caleb, since he isn't technically what the host in Black is this season, because the host in Black isn't a human hybrid host, he was made kind of like what Christina was saying this episode with her memory. She can make people based off of her memory. The host in Black is the same kind of thing, based off of Dolores' memory of William. So there's no fidelity or human struggling to accept this artificial body. But whereas with Caleb, just like with Delos, he starts, glitching out, shaking, and, obviously it was a really sad thing to watch unfold. One thing that I was apprehensive about that I was telling you guys is, would it be as sentimental? And I was saying this episodes back now, if we get a Caleb who is talking to Frankie, who quite isn't the Caleb, because as acknowledged this episode, your father died years and years ago, as Caleb said. But I like that it was still there for me, that relationship, even though her father had died years and years ago. It was still the way it was conducted, the farewells and everything like that among these sequences. It's kind of hard to do wrong with me when it comes to Aaron Paul. This is when we cut to a scene of when Dolores goes to the real William, who's still kind of, strung up there, just dead after obviously getting stabbed by the host in Black. And that's when Clementine walks out, and she's basically having a conversation with Dolores saying, you said you were going to make a world where creatures like us could finally be free. Did you really mean that? Yes, I did. And she was like, well, maybe it's time I go out there and see what's good for me, because there's places that, despite the incoming apocalypse, which is kind of true to the Rehoboam prediction from last season, still impending and acknowledged again at the end of this episode from the voiceover of Dolores. We have Clementine here like, nope, there's still pockets of worlds out there where the outliers are. I'm not talking about cohabitating with them. I'll kill them. And one thing I thought with Clementine this episode is that I would have liked to have seen the actual Clementine back, because this one was definitely recalibrated. If you remember, we had Clementine walking throughout the streets of Mexico City. The host in Black, should I say, asked her where Maeve was. She said, I'll die before I tell you, kind of thing. And she took her head, and he would have recalibrated her, which is why this, Clementine's a bit more docile, so to speak, a bit more ruthless and mean. I would have liked to have seen the real Clementine come back, or maybe Dolores reverse whatever the host in Black did, or herself, actually. But no, this Clementine continued on being ruthless and came back to be a bit of a, thorn in Caleb and Frankie and Stubbs' side, and quite literally for poor Stubbs. And so we're back with Frankie and Caleb. She fills him in on Mom and what happened there. We get some more teary exchanges, a bit of a singing of the episode title, but that's where a guy comes in and we have Stubbs combat that dude, and then Clementine comes out of nowhere and just completely wrecks him. And I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, I knew Stubbs was gonna die. I was hoping something more would happen with him, and I know when you consider the other deaths that we've already had, Stubbs doesn't really amount to much when you look at Maeve and Bernard and everyone else. So I guess it was part of the course. We kind of did see it coming, but I don't know. It just felt so abrupt. And also, as I was saying earlier, from a Clementine who actually isn't really Frankie herself. That's when Caleb has a little bit of a battle with Clementine. Turns out there was a bullet left, and Frankie put it in Clementine's head. So another character gone, but we'll talk about how characters can come back in a little bit. Meanwhile, while we have Christina portable in Dolores' little pack, we have a conversation with Maya, which ultimately ends up reminding Christina, the new Dolores, if you will, of that she chooses to see the beauty in this world. Sure, people are dying out there, this is happening, but look at a tree. No, but really, as Maya said, if you sit still long enough, you'll sense an ancient order, a deep peace, and that's what I choose to see. I see the beauty in the world. Obviously, this is quite a bit of a kicking and driving factor for what amounts Christina to get to the point of where she is towards the end of this episode to run that final test, of which will be, I suppose you could say, the salvation for all kind on the planet. And so William arrives at the Hoover Dam. The valley beyond is there open, of which Bernard opened. William starts shutting down all of the turbine valves, and as a result, it's, critical failure. Shutting down will erase all the data. But then, of course, we had Dolores arrive, and this turned into a little bit of a face-off. Of course, there was a bit of convenience there in between words. She eventually pulled the gun, and it got knocked aside, and the whole time I was just thinking you could have just shot him instead of pulling it last second. But either way, the rule of cool and all that, because they had to do a little bit of an exchange, because she's stronger now, the knife just kind of, sparked off of her. I'm seeing people say that Dolores had access to the Valley Beyond this whole time, but I don't think that's strictly true. The wording that was used when William was asking why keep it safe all these years, couldn't even open the door to their worlds, yet you protected them. And that's when Dolores replied, saying the door can be opened from both sides. So she then continued to say, I thought if I made a world perfect enough here, they would come back. That's not her saying I could open the door. Bernard had the key. He was the only one who could open the door. But she thought even though the door could be opened from this side, even though she couldn't technically open it, it can also be opened from the other side, meaning that she hoped the other hosts in the Valley Beyond, in the Sublime, would maybe open the door and come back into her world. But I don't think she's had access this whole time, like to open it willy-nilly at any point. That could only really be Bernard, but again, she was hoping that if she made the world perfect enough for them, they would come into her world, because Dolores, at the end of the day, is quite a lonely person, and I think, as evidently she said, she wanted them to come back. And so ultimately, this all got to that moment of when they're in that same tunnel of where Bernard hid the gun. At this point, she's run out of ammo, and we get the clip played from the full message of Bernard saying, it is too late now, we've burned ourselves to the ground. Again, this is what I meant by earlier, so it really doesn't feel like the whole world is doing this. It would have been cool to have seen a montage or something, but he continues to say that this world holds no more hope for us, but there's still hope for the next world. And that hope is a test run from her, and that her is Christina, if she chooses to. If you choose to give her that choice, you can't miss. Reach with your left hand. She reaches with her left hand, and she somewhat recites the lines back to the man in black, which must make no sense to the host in black. He's like, well, what do you want about this choice? A test run by her, and if she chooses to give her a chance. This is like, Dolores is just like, and I do choose. And so she shoots the host in black. And I don't know how I ultimately feel about this. There's obviously a part of all of this I appreciate, but I don't know, ultimately. I'm a bit, in between spaces right now. I feel like the redemption, so to speak, that we have Dolores going through here, it feels kind of rushed in a way, even though I do know there's nuance there, that deep down there is, with Dolores a part of Dolores, so there is good there, and all of these actions she's done has, despite some despicable, 23 years of ruling over humanity. There's a game where hosts hunt down humans. I get that there is the nuance of humanity there, even within Dolores, but all of this felt a little bit rushed to me. She takes him down, cuts out his host control unit, and reduces it to dust. So the host in black is literally no more. William is literally no more. Again, I do argue it's a bit like the pacing and everything of the past few episodes led up to a really good episode last episode, but it just feels like they ran out of gas, so to speak, for this finale. And that's not me shitting on it, by the way. It's just, it feels like there's something like a bit missing here for this final episode of the season. Maybe I would have liked to have seen a few more cracks within this redemptive aspect that Dolores was ultimately and has now gone on. And that's when we cut back to Caleb and Frankie. They're saying their goodbyes. He's gone as far as he can go because he's ultimately glitching out. Even though he acknowledges that he isn't the same dude as who died from back then, he's still got to realize a parent's greatest dream, and that is to see his child grow. And in between all of these scenes, there's quite a few things going on. This is why I'm a bit all over the place. We're back at Hoover Dam, and we have Dolores turn back on the turbine. So the Valley Beyond will still be going for some time in the future, but a question raised by some viewers out there is kind of a good point. Does this mean that when the structure eventually starts to crumble or whatever, that the people in the Sublime send out people into the real world to do maintenance to keep the servers going or whatever? You'd have to think so, because otherwise, who maintains this area? And so we have Dolores put on Dolores's or Christina's, but yet kind of Dolores, because the more she's become awake, she's become Dolores even more, if you know what I mean. And Hale even says, "Goodbye, Dolores. I made my choice. It's now time for you to make yours." And so it says the storyteller uploading. So essentially, you know, Dolores now is this, you know, very much so godlike person in the Sublime. Technically, they're all gods because they can make their own worlds. And this is where we cut back to Christina saying, "Oh, wait, the lights have come back on," with Teddy saying, "We're not alone anymore. We're back. We're somewhere new. I think we're in the Sublime." So from this moment onwards, they've been uploaded into the Sublime. Every detail of Teddy she cherishes, and that's how she was able to bring him back like this. This is when Christina says to Teddy that I've seen the best and worst of them with regards to people, but I remember it all. They're not like us. And Teddy's kind of like, yeah, their codes are written in their cells. They'll never change. And this was spurs on the idea for that test, and where she says, we could still see. That's when she says, run final test, a game of her own making, a dangerous game. And that's when Teddy asks, how will she do it? And that's when Christina replies saying, the same way I brought you back, I'll remember. And this is where we have this whole moment in the episode where Dolores in her old attire from Sweetwater was just walking amongst the city, more or less symbolizing humanity is done and dusted. This is where the newly awakened Dolores, if you will, says that a few may escape death for a few months, maybe even years, but ultimately their kind will go extinct. And that was playing around the same time as when Frankie was going off. So the rebels, this is to be acknowledged. There are other people out there who will live for a while, even maybe years. This could be decades, but it's still not going to be enough to sustain the human race. Again, for this to have gone down well for me, I kind of needed to see the bigger picture. I know I've mentioned that a few more times, but it does make you think, aren't there tons and tons of other people in tons of different countries? You literally could have these rebels start whole communities and everything like that, but I guess the point is people still, I don't know, like, I feel like that part, the execution there of truly trying to make me believe that ultimately every human is going to die, you know, at some point, you know, even these people boating off into the distance, I needed more to sell me on that. She then adds, they'll only live as long as the last creature who remembers them, and that creature is me. Meaning that she's going to kind of imagine them in this Sublime-esque situation in season 5, but more on that in a minute. We then have Dolores essentially sit on the banks of Hoover Dam and kind of accept her fate and crush her own host control unit. This is where we get a bit more clues as to what the next season could be, if it is, of course, renewed. And that's when Christina says, sentient life on Earth has ended, but some part of it might still be preserved in another world. My world. So it really is setting up how there is kind of no part of the real world that can kind of persevere onwards. Humankind will go extinct. The sentient life has ended, but some part of it might still be preserved, but not on this world, in another world. My world. And that is, I guess, the new Dolores' world in the Sublime. And that's when the cityscape around her, all red, starts digitizingly glitching and whatnot, and disappears. And we have Dolores in a plain field, and she says, one last loop around the bend. Again, I feel like words like this are kind of setting up one last season, you know, because they did originally plan for 5 seasons. They do have an ending in mind. And that's when the classical piano music in Westworld starts playing. We're back in Sweetwater. She says, maybe this time, with this, you know, final test, of course, maybe we'll set ourselves free. And that's more or less the ending. You know, you have Dolores kind of walk up to the camera in the middle of the town, and it's almost like a look of recognition there. You could argue Teddy was there, and my first thought of this with Sweetwater, I thought, oh, is this Teddy in the Sublime and the world that he chose to make, and Dolores is visiting that, perhaps? But either way, the gist is that the new Dolores, Christina, is kind of trying to run this final test run in the Sublime, and I suppose she might try and replicate people through memory, as she somewhat hinted at. All of this overall test, maybe starting back at Westworld, see how things go from here on out, with her new final test in motion. I mean, technically, she might have replicated the whole entire world within the Sublime, like kind of what like Bernard had went through. He saw all of these different possibilities that the hosts had been making in the Sublime this whole time, all these possibilities, all these ends. But now there's a final test through that of Dolores that I guess we're going to see in season 5. And what I'm wondering about is, are we going to see any of the real world with people like Frankie and how they carry on, even though the monologue of Christina / Dolores seems to indicate that ultimately they will go extinct, even if they last years. One thing I'm interested in is a massive part of this test that we'll be seeing in season 5 back in Westworld. Kind of like how she was saying this game ends where it began. Also, the train that was coming in had the number 5 on the front of it, which kind of makes me think, oh, season 5. And this did kind of feel like not just a season finale, but it did feel like a whole series finale, in where, even though I don't think it was the perfect finale, you could, if it wasn't renewed, be like, okay, it ends here. Dolores is going to continue on trying to do this final test where she hopefully corrects any flaws in what, constant loop humanity is on that ends in this destruction. And we can all imagine in our minds that it goes well somehow, just through the Sublime or whatever. But they are aiming for a season 5. Now, Deadline spoke to the showrunners, and they say that Joy tells us tonight and her husband / co-creator Jonathan Nolan haven't received word yet of a season 5 renewal. However, at the onset of the season, she told us that Jonah and I have always had an ending in mind that we hope to reach. We have not quite reached it yet. And when Deadline asked about Maeve, the Man in Black, like all these characters that are dead, she said that there are ways of conjuring characters back. There are some faces we will see again, but not all of them. Some deaths must be respected. So I think, considering if we get season 5 and what she was talking about there, I think we're going to see some faces brought back. Maybe Bernard brought back through the memory of Christina / Dolores. That's how we can see him again. I think the deaths that need to be respected that she was on about is potentially Dolores, probably the real William actually dying, like instead of just bringing them back again, maybe that. Of course, Maeve being reimagined in the same way that Bernard kind of made a copy of Maeve last episode and had that conversation when he was going through all of these possibilities with Akasheta and how we got insight into that conversation. So maybe Maeve, even though it won't be the Maeve who actually got shot in the head, could still have her life with her daughter. But again, the issue I kind of have with that is like, it's not the Maeve who kind of wanted it though. You've just made a copy who also wants that. So I don't know. It is a bit ambiguous with how all of that is unfolding at the end. Now, as for Aaron Paul's Caleb, I just don't know. In theory, we could have them brought back, but Christina didn't have any experience with Caleb, so I don't know how or if she could even bring him back. But either way, when she was back in Sweetwater, she did say, maybe this time we'll set ourselves free. This is all on top of how she said humans will only live as long as the last creature who remembers them, and that creature is her, so their existence literally depends on Christina / Dolores bringing them back in the Sublime. But the question is, how many people can she remember and bring back through her memory? This new world of hers, as she details as well, is a world like a maze that tests who we are, that reveals who we are to become. So I guess we're still going to have some trials and tribulations in this new world that she's building. I mean, otherwise it'd be pretty dull season 5. So as she's making this new recreation that lives on in another world, her world in the Sublime, I wonder what trouble she could run into. What I'm wondering now is, has Westworld kind of written themselves into a corner where there's not so much oil in the engine, so to speak? Because I'm thinking, and maybe that sounds like I'm not giving enough credit to the writers here, but I'm thinking, what can they do in season 5 that is set within this paradise Sublime where you can create worlds and delete them as if it's a copy on your hard drive, because these hosts have evolved to become like gods of their own universes? What world, even though we have a journey of Dolores trying to create a perfect salvation for humankind in this Sublime that lives on in this other world, what kind of stuff could she run into there? I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because that's all we have effectively to work with until we get this new season 5, as life on Earth It was apparently going to go extinct regardless. There's no salvaging that. But yeah, guys, there we have it. The season finale of Westworld Season 4. Even though it did feel like a series finale, if it was cancelled before they got their 5th season with their vision of an ending that they would like to reach, and as has been acknowledged by Lisa Joy, they haven't quite reached yet. I mean, of course, I want to see more Westworld, but I would be kind of okay with this ending. Just kind of knowing that it's almost like we know the plot of next season. I don't know really how to feel about this finale. Something about it feels a bit off to me. I can't really articulate it. As I've kind of been saying, some aspects felt a bit rushed. There is beauty that I see in the finale as well, of course. I do like the prospect of how certain things ended, especially with the setup for the continuation with Christina kind of becoming awake and more into her default code Dolores self and wanting to see the beauty in the world and trying to bring that about in another world for humans to kind of carry on as long as the last creature that can remember them, and that is her. I do feel like, you know, deaths like Maeve and that, it does feel a little bit done dirty in a way, but I guess the whole point is that she can just bring him back next season. But then again, for me, it's just like, that's not the same person. So I don't know. I really enjoyed this season. I just felt like the previous episodes were really engaging and interesting. Some more than others, of course, but they ramped up into a point of where this finale kind of, I don't know, it didn't bring it home as much as I thought it would, even though in other ways in the episode it did. As an overall product, it just felt a little bit, I don't know, I didn't vibe with it as much as I think I wanted to. You know, there's no post-credit scene, not that there has to be or anything like that. There's no answers for previous season stuff. People are still like, well, what was that fidelity test? Is that technically what happens even beyond the annihilation and extinction of humankind? Technically, you could argue that that post-credit scene of season 2 could be picked up again in season 5. What did you guys think of the season finale of Westworld season 4? Did it live up to expectations? Even if you weren't expecting massive things, did you still really enjoy it? What do you think of the deaths of Bernard, Stubbs, Maeve, Clementine, Dolores, Man in Black, Host in Black? The list goes on, really. The new season that will be, I guess, set within the Sublime? I don't know, guys. Let me know your thoughts on Season 4 as a whole. I also want to thank all of you who have regularly watched these videos and my coverage of Westworld. Of course, I'll be carrying it on in the future whenever we get that future season, if we get that future season. But I'm sure there's going to be other videos on the channel that you're going to be interested in because we cover a bunch of things here. But everyone, I'm going to love you and leave you now. So like the video if you did enjoy it. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And I'll see you hosts and humans, I suppose, in Season 5's Sublime.